hobby friends, let's talk about Ash Waste Nomads. Since the release of contrast paints and all the response products from other makers, let's call them heavy-bodied inks as a generic term, people have been going nuts for the fast and effective options they offer for mini painters. That said, the maker's suggested application is pretty limiting, I think, and isn't necessarily going to get you great-looking results. The minis won't lose you points in a tournament, but they'll also be a long way from wowing your opponents. So, using these rather gorgeous new Ash Waste Nomads from Necromunda, let's take a look at how you can take your contrast paint jobs from 0 to hero, and at lightning speed too. Step 1, and already a departure from the typical process. While we are told to paint contrast paints over a white base, if you want properly good looking results, you really want to put a little more consideration into it than that. I'm using an airbrush here to lay down a brown base on these, but of course a rattle can or brush primer will do you just fine. And I'm using brown because I already know I'm going for a warm cream palette on these, so I might as well start setting those tones now. Continuing that theme, my next paint is orange. Again, I'm using an airbrush for this, but it's perfectly possible to rattle can, dry brush, or even paint on a Zenithal look. And you're not going to want to skip this step either. Contrast paints are made to gather in recesses and creases, which is why they can approximate shading and give you some definition on your minis without too much effort. But what they absolutely do not give you is global lighting, and as I've discussed on the channel before, if you want to really raise your game and get good looking minis, getting your lighting right is easily the fastest way to improve your results. Here's what they look like with just brown and orange, already nicely defined. For this particular job, I do want the transparent paints to retain most of their quality though. I want fairly light results, so over the orange I also spray another layer, this time a natural white, meaning not as cool as titanium white, just a little bit off-white. It may seem redundant to spray an orange Zenithal when you're going to be going over it with white, but that orange is going to remain visible in the border with the brown and also in some of the corners and crannies on the model too. It'll also add a lot of complexity for very little effort. Even using an opaque white, the orange will still influence the temperature and tone of the final piece. When that's done, we get our first proper colour layer done, namely a raw sienna filter over everything. The inspiration for this paint job, and who are we kidding, the mini as a whole, is the Tuskan-Raiders from Star Wars, so this will get us in the right cream kind of territory for their robes. You can of course swap out whatever colour scheme you like, but bear in mind that these are transparent paints and they're going to mix darker and darker the more of them you layer on top of each other. So always try and arrange your work so that you're moving from the lightest tones to the darkest. Right, time to get the palette out now. The next colour I want to block in is all the silver. This was probably the single most time-consuming job, but even then, using a metallic paint with good coverage and moving confidently with the brush, it wasn't so bad. The metal is down, and now on to the leather. I'm using a straight-up ink here, one of my favourites from Vallejo, and relying on the sometimes patchy quality of inks to give us some free texture. The qualities of a paint, like its coverage or texture, are only really a negative if they don't look like you imagined they would. Once you learn a paint's qualities, you just need to find the right application for them. We aren't even halfway done with these guys and they're already looking pretty cool, so let's keep the momentum going and move on to those rebreather masks. Nice easy one here, using this grey speed paint from Army Painter. I know I've got some varnish layers coming later and I won't really be doing any sort of watery blending on these guys, so I'm not too worried about that dreaded reactivation issue. Next up, I put a few different shades of brown paint on the palette. I've got a yellow brown, a reddish brown and a, well, browny brown. All of these are contrast paints or contrast style paints. I'm doing this on the dry palette because I'm looking for fast and punchy results, so I don't need the dilution or time afforded by a wet palette. pretty easy and relaxing job here, blocking in different bits of cloth in these different shades. Again, I'm not really worried about texture since these guys are supposed to be weathered and worn looking. The next job is to pick out those little bits of metallic that I missed and generally hit details like the odd wire or bit of string. If you're in a real rush, I suppose you can skip this if you want, but with some opaque paints and a little bit of brush control, it doesn't take that long at all, and it will really lift your mini from cool to wow. Alright, these guys are looking good already, but there is one more thing we can do to really amp up the weathered, grimdark vibe on them. That's right, it's an oil wash. I mix up a thickish wash consistency of burnt umber with just a tiny bit of Prussian blue to darken and cool the tone down a bit, and then slather it all over with glee. About 20 minutes later or so, I come back with a cotton bud and start cleaning up. As well as lifting the paint from upper surfaces, giving us even more definition, we can also dab, streak and smudge the oils around to get even more texture and life into these guys. It's super fast and looks great, so you really should give this technique a go. If you're enjoying the video, by the way, you can help others find it by liking and commenting below, and if you like the channel generally, hit that subscribe and bell button too. There's also a dedicated Discord full of fab painters for you to join, and for the financially irresponsible, a Patreon where you can help me cover some of the costs in making these videos. Thanks as always to my gorgeous and infinitely talented supporters. For the final 40 minutes or so, an optional but highly recommended step. Grab some acrylic, opaque paints, lighter tones, and do some really simple hatching, stippling and scratchy edge highlighting. By focusing on the head and shoulders and a few choice edges and surfaces, and by keeping a relaxed, sketchy attitude, you'll really add extra life to these guys, and since everything else is so quick, why not invest that last little bit of time? And that's it. 10 Nomads in about 6 hours, which is just over half an hour each if you're keeping score. I really like painting like this, not because I'm in a rush, but because the efficiency means I can concentrate on things that really matter, like mood, colour, and having fun with my mini painting. And it's of course really satisfying to get results fast. But what do you guys think? Are these not quite copyright infringing desert dwellers suitably dark and mysterious? What other Necromunda gangs would work well with this approach? Let me know in the down below and I'll see you next time.